Welcome back to The Wheel on the School, Chapter 4. Chapter 4. Yella and the Farmer. They had stumbled through arithmetic. They had been stupid about grammar, but when it came to penmanship, well, there was just no way to keep their minds on penmanship. Lena was the first one to give up in despair. The teacher, walking along the aisle, had stopped to study her copybook. Lena promptly gave up. "Teacher," she said, "I can't sit still. And when you can't sit still, you can't do penmanship. It's all jiggly." The whole class stopped. "Let's make plans," August suggested hopefully. "We ought to make plans about how we're going to get a wheel for those two storks." "The storks will be coming awfully soon, won't they?" Elka asked the teacher. "Well, the stork season is here. There's no evading that," the teacher said slowly. "And since you brought it up so shrewdly, Elka, I can't deny that we haven't much time." "Then why are we wasting it on penmanship?" Yella said. He held up his copybook for the teacher and all to see. He had done about 3 words of penmanship, but then he'd given up and drawn a picture of a big stork with a big fish held crosswise in its bill. "That fish is the pickerel out of our own moat," Yella explained. The teacher laughed. "You're not only thinking way ahead, you're drawing way ahead, Yella, and it isn't penmanship. But if you're all going to write in your copybooks like quavery old men, Grandmother Sybil the Third could write a steadier hand than you. Lena, well..." The teacher paused. The whole class waited expectantly. "Now listen, boys and Lena. Yesterday we lost an hour, and if now I dismiss school again a whole hour early, how much does it mean to you? Would you be willing to come to school after this is all over, a whole free Saturday afternoon, to make up for this lost time?" "Oh, yes," they all said together. "Oh, sure." "Then it's agreed," the teacher said promptly. "Now we've an hour before noon. Suppose we spend that hour looking through Shora. In the afternoon we'll branch out over the countryside. We'll go to every farm down every road." "Oh boy," August said. "If we each found a wheel, we'd have a wheel for almost every house in Shora." "We've got to find one for Grandmother Sybil's house too," Lena reminded all of them. "Everybody but legless Yanis," Yella immediately agreed. "All I'd give him is a rock in the head." "Not so fast, not so fast," the teacher cautioned them. "Our whole problem is to find one wheel. Don't start rolling your wheels to the school and up on every roof on Shora. Find just one. I'm afraid that'll be difficult enough. And remember, when the clock in the tower strikes 12, all report back to school. If we haven't found a wheel, I'll assign each one a road to search this afternoon." They streamed out of the school. It was exciting to rush out of school and down the village street, to scatter and branch out in a search of every yard and barn and shed. They were tremendously hopeful at first, but the short last hour of Saturday morning rushed on. And now it hadn't seemed like an hour at all, hardly 10 minutes, when the big clock in the tower was bonging out the hour of 12. It bonged 12 slow times. All over the village, every schoolchild was counting the strokes. It was hard to believe the clock, but 12 o'clock it was. The clock had counted right. In the attic of his own house, Yella counted the bongs of the clock. He looked disgustedly through the little dusty attic window up at the great white face of the clock. It was 12. The big bronze hand said so too. And here he sat, empty-handed in the attic of his own house. He was muddy and wet. He'd been across back lots and over ditches, but had ended up empty-handed in his own dusty, dry attic. It had seemed silly to think that there'd be a wagon wheel up in the attic, but the teacher had said to look where a wheel could be and where it couldn't possibly be. Well, a wheel couldn't possibly be in an attic, and it wasn't. Yella had found a bow. In his own attic, he'd found a bow that he'd never known about, but no arrows. Now he sat behind the dusty window and twanged the empty bow at the offending round white base of the clock in the tower. Yella glanced down from his high window into the backyard of Grandmother Sybil's house next door. The cellar trapdoor flew open, and there came Akka struggling up out of the cellar with a big stone crock. Akka set down the crock and stared up at the clock in the tower. Akka felt cheated and disappointed. He'd been through every shed in Shora, except the shed of legless Yanis, of course. You didn't just go up to Yanis and say, "May I look through your shed?" You'd get your head knocked off. Grandmother Sybil's house had been his last house. It had no shed. Akka had been desperate enough to ask Grandmother Sybil if he might look through her cellar. "It's no use, Akka," Grandmother Sybil had said. "I know exactly what's in my old cellar. 1 crock of sauerkraut. I don't keep things down cellar anymore. It's too difficult for me to get down there. But I can't stand the smell of sauerkraut, so there it is." "The teacher told us," Akka had said doubtfully, "to look where a wheel could be and where it couldn't possibly be." "Well, you've come to the right place," Grandmother Sybil had chuckled. "A wheel couldn't possibly be in my cellar, but your teacher is right. That's the only way to find things. So go ahead and look, else you won't be satisfied. And while you're there, will you carry the sauerkraut out into the backyard for me? It's even beginning to smell through the floor." Now, as he stood staring up at the tower clock with the crock at his feet, Akka's eyes suddenly caught a movement behind the high attic window next door. Yella was aiming an arrowless bow at him. "Look what I found!" Yella shouted through the window. "That's not a wagon wheel!" Akka yelled back. "No, but boy, could you have fun with it if you had some arrows. What did you find?" "A crock of sauerkraut!" Akka yelled, and suddenly he grinned. Yella made a face. "What good is sauerkraut for storks?" Akka shrugged. "About as much good as a bow, I guess. Come on, let's get back to school. It's 12. In a barn at the edge of the village, Pier and Dirk heard the clock in the tower bong out the hour. It stopped them cold. They sat looking at each other guiltily. 12 o'clock, Dirk told Pier, "and you and I just played." "Yeah, I know," Pier said. They had found a haymow in the barn. They had climbed it to the top of the haymow. Of course, there had been no wagon wheel on top of the hay. They hadn't expected one. But, as Pier had told Dirk virtuously, they were supposed to look where a wheel couldn't possibly be. Of course, having climbed to the top of the haymow, they'd had to slide down to the barn floor. That had been such fun. They'd climbed right back, not even pretending to look for a wagon wheel now. It was amazing how fast an hour of fun had flown by. Now it was 12. Pier looked at Dirk. Dirk looked at Pier. They sat in the hay that had slid down to the barn floor with them. Dirk looked at the sprawled hay and hastily jumped up. "We haven't got a wagon wheel," he said woefully. "All we've got is a mess." "Not even a spoke," Pier said dolefully. "Maybe we'd better grab up the hay and take it along," Dirk suggested. Hay for a stork? It isn't a goat. No, but we haven't got time to put it back on top of the mow. If we take it along and drop it somewhere, the farmer won't know we played in his hay. It seemed a good idea. At least it was about the best thing to do under the circumstances. They hastily scraped the sprawled hay together. Each grabbed up an armful and started running towards school. Boy, that was fun, Pierce said, wasn't it? Yes, Dirk said guiltily, but I hope somebody found a wheel. Couldn't we take the hay to school and say it's for the storks to build a nest with? Pierce suggested. That would show we did something. Maybe, Dirk said doubtfully, but come on, run. It's way past 12. When Dirk and Pierre came running toward the schoolyard, Yella and Akka were already there with the teacher. Far behind Pierre and Dirk came Elka, pushing a high old baby carriage. A distance behind Elka, toward the canal end of the street, Lena came running empty-handed. When they were all gathered in the schoolyard, the teacher looked at each one of them in turn. A bow, a baby carriage, 2 bundles of hay, but no wagon wheel, the teacher said slowly. He looked at Akka. And what did you find, Akka? A crock with sauerkraut, Akka said somberly. But I didn't bring it here. I didn't think it would be any use to storks. I didn't find anything at all, Lena said hastily. The teacher looked at the bundles of the hay. Why did you bring hay? He asked Pierre. We thought if somebody had found a wheel, Pierre said vaguely, the hay might help the storks to start a nest. Dirk nodded. Yes, that's what we thought, he said hastily. And you brought a baby carriage, Elka? Why? I brought it for the wheels, Elka said. I suppose I didn't really think they were big enough. I guess they were just the nearest thing to a wagon wheel that I could find. My mother let me have it, he explained. She said since I was her last baby, definitely, and me going on 12. Some baby, Yella said. Ha! Then we've got nothing, Lena said softly. They stood in an unhappy little circle in the schoolyard. They were so disappointed they did not look at each other. Somehow they all seemed to stare at the silly baby carriage. Pierre and Dirk stood there with their foolish armloads of hay. Pierre suddenly stepped up and shoved his hay into Elka's baby carriage. In obvious relief, Dirk shoved his armload on top of Pierre's. There stood the baby carriage with hay sticking out of it in every direction. Then nobody was looking at the baby carriage. All eyes turned up. There above the dike, high in the sky, high, white, huge wings flapping, 2 storks appeared from over the sea. Over the tower the storks winged still higher. Flew high, flew straight, didn't dip down for shore, did not even pause or circle. Then they were 2 white winging dots disappearing fast in the enormous blue sky. Soon they were gone. Slowly all the eyes came down. All were staring at the baby carriage again. Elka's face became red. He muttered something that nobody understood, grabbed the baby carriage, and shoved it disgustingly into the far corner of the schoolyard. Now, if we only had a goat, Akka said, looking at a tuft of hay that had spilled out of the baby carriage and over his wooden shoes. No one laughed, and Akka wasn't smiling. No one said a thing. They were so quiet they could hear Lena swallowing hard a couple of times. That was the trouble with being a girl, Lena thought. You wanted to cry at things like this. But boys just looked angry and stubborn and disgusted. Suddenly, Lena didn't swallow anymore, didn't want to cry anymore. She was angry. Yella said it for them all. Look, he savagely told them all. We can't mess around with bows and baby carriages and play in hay and fool around anymore. He took his bow and slung it hard toward the corner with the baby carriage. It somehow caught in the hay sticking out of the baby carriage, but Yella did not bother to notice it. Look, he said, with the storks here, we've got to hunt for just one wheel, and we've got to hunt hard. Yella was angry with himself and everybody else. Yella is right, the teacher said, and I am happy you all realize it now. However, we didn't really expect to find a wheel in Shora. Those are only the first two storks we have seen, so we shouldn't get too disappointed. Nevertheless, from now on, the storks will be coming by twos, and then they'll be swinging over Shora in flocks. And there's so little we can do to attract a couple of them to Shora. All we can do is put up a wheel. The rest is up to the storks. But that little we should do promptly. After that we can play. We'll really hunt, they solemnly promised. Fine. Then we'll start in again right after lunch. There are 5 roads spreading out from Shora. You boys will each take a road. Lena will take the dike. The dike? Lena said. Yes, I know there isn't much chance of a wagon wheels being on the dike, but from the dike you can see all the little side roads and lanes and the isolated farmhouses that lie between the roads that the boys are taking. You can cover those while the boys search every house and barn along their roads. How far do we go? Elka asked. As far as it takes to find a wheel, Yella answered him before the teacher could say anything. I'll be in the school all afternoon and into the evening if that's necessary, the teacher said. So be sure to report to me when you finish your search. If somebody finds a wheel, I'll ring the school bell. When you hear it, come back to school. Now, everybody home for lunch. But don't forget, I still say look everywhere, where a wheel could be and where it couldn't possibly be. In spite of your disappointment in Shora this morning, the unexpected still always comes up to surprise us. It sounded hopeful again, and no more storks had appeared from over the sea. They all broke away and ran home as hard as they could. It was 4 o'clock Saturday afternoon. There was not a sound in Shora, except for 3 small children playing in the village square at the foot of the tower. There wasn't a child. The 5 boys and Lena were scattered over the countryside, looking for a wagon wheel. In the doorway of the school, the teacher looked down the empty road that stretched from the school into the flat country. This was the road along which Yella was searching for a wagon wheel. The road lay deserted. Yella was nowhere in sight. The teacher smiled a little to himself. Yella's really got his heart in it now, he softly told himself. And when Yella gets his heart into things, he's liable to hunt for a wheel into the next province. From over the school, high in the sky, 2 storks appeared. They winged away in rapid flapping flight. The teacher stood looking after them. The children in the countryside would see those storks too. Just so they don't lose courage, the teacher told himself. When the teacher looked down the road again, it wasn't empty anymore. Far away, a wheel came rolling down the narrow country road. A boy was rolling it. He struggled it onto an upright position whenever it fell and rolled it on. That must be Yella. Only Yella was strong and husky enough to wrestle a heavy wagon wheel down a road all by himself. Yella had a wheel. The teacher half turned as if to hurry into the school to ring the bell. Better wait, he told himself. You can't tell Yella You can't tell what Yella may do when he has his heart set on things. No, better wait. He looked down the road again. Now, no wheel was rolling down the road. Instead, there was a farmer leading Yella to the school. The wheel was gone. The teacher waited in the doorway of the school. They came closer. The unwilling Yella and the big, angry farmer. The farmer was leading Yella down the road by the lobe of his ear. He had something red in his other hand. It looked like a piece of red roof tile. The teacher waited. At last, after a long, painful march down the road, Yella was being guided by his ear across the schoolyard. Yella looked stubborn and guilty and angry all at the same time. He stared defiantly at his teacher as he neared the doorway, even though he had to hold his head carefully tilted against any painful jerks on his ear. The pinched earlobe really must be throbbing now. "I didn't steal it," Yella said morosely, as the farmer halted him before the teacher. "He says I stole it, but I didn't. I yelled and called all over that farm, but there was nobody, and that wheel hadn't been used in ages. It was even sunk in the mud because it stood under the drip of the shed. It took all I had to get it loose, so long it had been standing there, and now he says I stole it." The farmer grimly let Yella talk. Now he faced the teacher. "What goes on in this school of yours here anyway?" he demanded. "Teaching children to steal things from people? There I was, deepening a ditch at the back of my farm. I poked my head out while I rest my back a minute, and there I see a wheel rolling down the road. I look at my shed, and my wagon wheel isn't in its place against the shed wall. It's my wheel rolling down the road. So I run and jump ditches to catch up with this boy, and I still can't believe it. In broad daylight. When I stopped at the shed, sure enough, my wheel was gone, and in its place all there was this." He shoved a broken piece of red roof tile at the teacher. On the tile, Yella had scratched with a nail. "I'm taking the wagon wheel to put on the roof of our school for storks to build a nest on. We want storks to come to shore again. I'll bring it back as soon as the storks are through with it. Yella Sharda." The teacher forced himself not to smile. The hot-eyed farmer was watching him every moment while he read. "Well," the teacher said slowly, feeling his way, "at least it isn't a downright thief who leaves a note and signs his name after he's taking something. And thieves hardly ever promise to return what they steal. So if we do teach them to steal at this school, you've got to admit we teach them to do it differently." He grinned good-naturedly at the man. You can see Yella meant to return it. "Sure, I've got to wait for my wheel until storks lay eggs and make nests, and after the storks are through, I can use my own wheel again," the farmer said hatefully. "I need that wheel. I need my wagon only in spring and fall, but when I need it, I need it. In fact, I'd planned to put the wheel back on the wagon this afternoon, and there it went, rolling down the road." The idea of his wheel rolling down the road made him furious all over again. The farmer kept a wrathful hold on Yella's ear. "If you would let go of his ear," the teacher said, "Yella won't run away, I promise you. I can maybe explain how Yella came to the wheel without your permission. I'm not excusing it, understand, just explaining it, because you look like a man who would understand. You look to me as if you were once a boy just like Yella yourself, a boy who, once he sets his heart on something, stops at almost nothing. Didn't you as a boy sometimes take something when you couldn't get it any other way?" The farmer relaxed a little. He almost started grinning, but he made a scowl. "Yeah," he said gruffly, because I wanted a bow and arrows. All the kids had bows and arrows, all but me. How I suffered, because I was the biggest of the whole lot. My mother wouldn't let me. She was afraid I'd somehow shoot myself. How, I don't know. I didn't even have a knife, on account of my mother, to make myself a bow and arrows. And here I was, the biggest kid, just as big and husky as this one. He looked at Yella appraisingly. No bigger. Well, I got the knife. Don't ask me how. Then I made the bow and arrows, and then I was happy. My grandfather caught me returning his knife. How he warmed my britches! Well, he could have skinned me with a knife. I was still happy. I had my bow and arrows. Well, there you see, the teacher said. And now you've warmed Yella's ear. And Yella still doesn't have the wheel he wanted so badly. The man looked at the red, swollen ear. The teacher explained the school's great project of luring just 2 storks back to shore, and the man listened. He nodded understandingly when the teacher finished. I'll tell you, he began, but then he looked at Yella's ear again. Better put a cold, wet rag against that ear, kid, he interrupted himself. Yeah, I can understand now why he did it in all the excitement. But as I started to say, he can still have the wheel in about a week as soon as I'm through with the wagon. He can have it till fall. After this week, I won't need the wagon again until fall, not on my little farm. That would be too late, wouldn't it? Yella anxiously asked the teacher. I counted at least 5 pairs of storks flying over this afternoon. They're starting to come so fast there can't be a stork left in Africa among those rhinoceroses you were telling us about. In Africa, they live right among the lions and hippos and zebras, he eagerly explained to the farmer. But here, they live right in our villages with us. Then he said unhappily, except Shora, of course. Yes, I'm afraid in a week it might be too late, Yella, the teacher said. He turned to the farmer. Could Yella help you with your wagon work on your farm? It seems to me he owes you at least that for all the inconvenience he caused you. And if he could help, it shouldn't take a week before you can let the school have the wheel. It's a deal, the farmer said promptly. I'll fix the wheel on the wagon as soon as I get back, and Yella can come and help me Monday, or even right now. It's up to him. Yella stood thoughtfully feeling his throbbing ear. Do you still know how to make arrows? He carefully asked the farmer. I've got a bow, but no arrows. Oh, sure, the man said. And there's plenty of alder bushes right along the ditch I was deepening at the back of my farm. If you want arrows, I'll show you how. He patted his pocket. I've got a knife of my own now, he said with a grin. I'll be there, Yella promised happily. But maybe this afternoon. I ought to look some more for a wagon wheel. The storks are coming over so fast. He looked at the teacher for approval. Suit yourself, the farmer said. He strode off. Yella tenderly pulled at the lobe of his sore ear and looked meekly at the teacher. I didn't mean to steal it, he explained, but there was no one to ask and there was the wheel. His voice trailed off. Guess I'd better look some more, he said lamely and walked away. Look, but don't take without asking, the teacher called after him. Just pinch your ear if you're tempted. They both laughed a little. Then Yella turned to go, and the teacher went back into the school. As Yella crossed the schoolyard, 4 storks flew high overhead. Now they're coming by 4s, Yella called to the teacher. Then he noticed that he was alone. He stared up at the storks again. Suddenly, he shook his fist at them. Do we have to knock you down to get to your stop in Shora? His eyes fell on Elka's baby carriage in the corner of the schoolyard. That bow lay in the hay. If storks wouldn't stop in Shora, maybe he could make them stop. Shoot them down with bow and arrow. That might be the way to do it. Not kill them, just bring them down. Stuff them in a coop until there was a wheel up on the school. Then they'd have storks in Shora. He eyed the open door of the school. On tiptoe, he stole across the schoolyard to the corner where the baby carriage was and grabbed his bow. He ducked through a hedge and by a roundabout way, out of sight of the school windows, set off across the fields toward the farm with the wheel and the alder bushes for arrows. All right, see you chapter 5.